all the new members on the committee, and I think the reps are the same. So, with that, are there any apologies? The apologies from Joan Coombs, so I understand she's ill. No other apologies?
I think Fiona Craig, she's on holiday.
Okay. She'll get a letter for the teacher for that.
Indeed.
Okay. Declarations of interest? None. Minute of the 23rd of January, pages 2 to 7. Any comments or questions? None. Rolling action law to 10. Councillor Nimmo.
Convener, just a quick question in relation to 377. There was an update. Just a second. Sorry. It's okay, I've got the wrong one. Apologies.
Right, so do you want to raise it or are you?
No, fine.
Okay. Anyone else on the rolling action log? Okay. The autism special basis developments. David?
Thank you, Convener. This is the next in a series of papers that we've been bringing to the Education Executive regarding the expansion of the autism provision within Falkirk Council. Previous papers highlighted the increase in demand. We were working at a prevalence of about 1.3% historically, and that's almost doubled over recent years, but that's a national perspective. In the background, currently we've got three provisions: Lakeside, Denny and Grangemouth. Currently Lakeside's got 42 places, Grangemouth 33 and Denny has got 38 places. We required further capacity for the coming year and to look to future years. We engaged in a full consultation, a statutory consultation, back in October last year, and it's supported by HMIE. The outcome paper from that was brought to the January Executive, and I was asked to then bring back a further paper about what the expansion proposal would be for the coming August. This paper details the request and is asking the Executive to agree increased capacity for ASD provision by creating specialist classes within Easter Carmuirs Primary School and Larbert High School from this August, and to agree that Children's Services undertake further work to assess the impact of that expansion plans and the need to consider future classes in the future. As detailed in section 4, the consultation process is still ongoing with the various schools involved. We're in constant dialogue with those. The head teachers are speaking regularly to their parent bodies. We're asking the Executive to agree the expansion within the two schools detailed. In section 5.3, it details the additional staffing required. We're proposing to create one class in Easter Carmuirs Primary School and two classes within Larbert High School, and the requirements of the staff are detailed in 5.3. That's an additional 10 staff. The capital costs required for this programme are £0.275 million, and those would be met through the capital programme. 6.2 details the revenue costs for the staffing requirements of £350,000, and they would be met within the budget allocation to Children's Services. The programme is also contingent on ongoing, more rigorous staff development opportunities for the colleagues involved within the bases and also within our mainstream schools to ensure that we build capacity for the future, to mitigate against future need for further expansion. And that work is already ongoing and will be accelerated over the coming months to ensure that everyone involved is suitably trained once they have been recruited to post. The legal details are set out in section 6.4 and the risks are set out in section 6.5. And really, in conclusion, we're seeking for approval to progress with the recruitment programme and the creation of these two new bases from August 2018. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor McHugh, you want to, as a portfolio holder, move the report?
Yeah, I'll move the report. Convener, I'd be very happy to second the report. I think this is a good news report. It's something that has very much been come from the parent body, and the demand to have their children educated with their peers and as close to home and I'm very pleased to see that this is something that we'll be able to roll out, and highlight that we've supported this by additional funding at the budget.
Okay, I don't think that was opposed at the budget, but anyone else got any comments to make?
Thank you. Is it me first? Thank you. I think as teachers we welcome the expansion to this provision for autistic spectrum disorder pupils. I still have issues about Larbert High School being one of the places that it's been situated in because of the nature of the size of the building, and we've always been told that it's at capacity. There is one point in 5.3, the principal teacher graded at PT3. When was this job sized?
So those posts are subject to job sizing. That's really just an indicative figure, and obviously we'll begin through the job sizing process once we've got approval to progress to the next phase.
Anything else? Anyone else?
Convener, I think it's a very well presented and clear report. Thank you for it. And at the pre-agenda meeting, when we were just talking through this, I did raise a question that it's maybe for everyone here to be aware of it. My question is, obviously the trend's increasing, and I was interested to see if anyone could give us any idea as to why there is increasing trend in the need for the extra provision. And in the conversation it was said that there was increased awareness of needs, and we talked about things like diet and maybe parental behaviour and influence as well as that. But obviously the fact that there's staff development and training, that's a great aspect of it. So that would mean that we were thinking ahead as to what we can do in the days that lie ahead. But it would be really interesting. I would find it interesting if we were made aware of some of the research that maybe could enlighten us as to why the trends are increasing, to see if there's anything could be done at grassroots level. As I said earlier, if there's a log jam coming up ahead, you want to know who's throwing the logs into the river. So that kind of attitude, thought, is behind my question. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And again, yes, I think it's a national phenomenon that we're aware of. And again, I think you've highlighted some of the potential factors that contribute to this. Awareness is being one factor there, but there are quite clearly a number of other factors coming to bear here for such a significant increase in the prevalence of autism and autism spectrum disorders. So we are actually working with the national bodies to understand that, and obviously as we become aware of particular papers relating to this, I'm more than happy to bring those to the members' attention of this group for further information and discussion as required.
Convener, just on a practical point, these additional 10 teachers, are they specialist teachers, or are they teachers that will be trained to be specialists? And obviously the follow-on question will be, how easy will it be to get 10 suitably qualified people?
Basically, we're looking at a combination of both. We've got current colleagues within both Grangemouth and Denny that we've been working to train up to support this particular expansion. When we go to recruitment, we're hoping to attract additional qualified colleagues into Falkirk Council. The view would be to deploy any colleagues that require further training into the established resources, and then use the qualified staff to support the opening of the new provisions. So we wouldn't be opening the new provisions with newly appointed unqualified staff. So it's a kind of blended approach, and we're very much waiting to see the uptake. We are aware that Falkirk is seen as an attractive option, and the reputation of the previous bases is well regarded nationally. So the hope is that we will attract suitably qualified individuals, but in the absence of that, then those staff that we do, we can train, and we can use our existing qualified staff to support that process and the opening of the bases.
Anyone else? If not, we'll move on. Early learning expansion plan. Larry?
Thanks very much, Chair. The purpose of this report is outlined in section 1. There's 8 recommendations before the Education Executive today. The first recommendation looks at to agree the Children's Services updated plans for early years expansion. They're contained throughout the report and included in the appendices. To note the updated information that's used for financial planning and projections, A number of the projections used previously have changed. A different set of data has come from the national a body that looks at a projection of births and things like that, National Register of Scotland, NRS. We've used the updated figures in the updated plans before Education Exec today. Recommendation 3 is that the Education Exec agrees to the proposed 5 delivery models, and they're outlined in one of the appendices to the report. The fourth recommendation is that the Director of Children's Services can, once the 2018 capital funding is known, select and proceed with the expansion projects proposed for 2018. Again, those shown in the appendices. The fifth recommendation is that the Director of Children's Services can earmark £270,000 from the revenue monies that we've already got to provide additional staff and resources to support the overall project. The details of that's contained in the report, and it's mainly to provide professional and technical support within the design team that we've got based on development services, because as we go through this project, the critical factor is we need to start to do the design and planning work for the 40 infrastructure plans that are outlined in the report. I can't stress highly enough how much it is to get that support. It's temporary support that provide on a temporary basis, and indeed it would also provide some support on a permanent basis for my own team. And my own team is involved heavily in dealing with parents, looking at admissions, and dealing with the day-to-day going through the whole project in terms of liaison with childminders, with partner providers. So we need to build that support in now so that the project goes through smoothly and in its transitional stages. The sixth recommendation is that the Director of Children's Services continues to provide regular reports to the Education Exec as the plans in progress with the project as it develops. I've said in all the reports we've had, this is an iterative process. It's a work in progress. I can't stress that highly enough. There'll be challenges. It's a very exciting project as we go through it, and there'll be reports coming to most of the Education Execs to update the Education Exec on where we are at various times with that project. In terms of the seventh recommendation, it's to update the Education Exec as soon as we know the details of the future revenue and capital funding once it's announced. We've got some certainty over 17-18, and we've got certainty over the revenue for 18-19. We're waiting, and we'll get by the end of May details of the capital funding, which will again bring our projections to fruition. It will mean that some of our uncertainty and unknowns become knowns at that time. But nonetheless, we're progressing with this today on the basis that we've made certain assumptions about how much we're going to get, and I think it's right that we start to do the design and project on that basis. Obviously there'll be fine-tuning and there'll be realignment as we go through the project. That's just the nature of these infrastructure projects. We'll have to do that as we go through it. But the main thing is we'll bring the reports back to update the Education Exec as we change these as we go through it. And the eighth recommendation is that there's a slight change to the early years admissions policy as outlined in Appendix 4. Some of the key information in the report, I don't propose to dwell on this very long because we spoke about it probably at length. In Section 3, the key thing is that it outlines in Section 3.2 the key factors that have changed since I last updated the Education Exec with the report. Section 3.3 confirms a revised financial template was sent in to the Scottish Government on the 8th of March. There's been no feedback from the Government on this. At the moment, the Government are still assimilating all the 32 returns that they've had, and we expect to know more information as we go through later on this month, and certainly next month, the summation and the totality of that, and that will influence the decisions that are made around funding in May. In Section 4, quite a detailed Section 4, it looks at the revised population projections that have been used. If I could draw members' attention to Section 4.2 in particular, the key area in Section 4.2 that looks at our planned uptake for 2, 3, 4 and 5-year-olds. The planned uptake figure that we're using, which is the key figure at the moment, this is to quote a mathematic term, it's the local common denominator for it, it's 4,136. That's the key figure that we have got to make sure our infrastructure within Falkirk Council School Estate and using partner provider and voluntary agencies, we've got to have enough places for 4,136 pupils. If that changes, we'll let you know. But that's the hardwire assumption that we've got to get. Based on that in section 4.3, it then moves that figure to an annualised hours. This eliminates the risk we have with some early establishments only operating AM, PM. Annualised hours brings a common sense approach, a common theme to it. So everything we're doing looks at annualised hours of provision through all our estate and working with partner and voluntary agencies. The current capacity is outlined in section 4.4. Section 4.5 outlines the 5 proposed delivery models. Section 4.6 compares the current projected demand with our own current capacity. There is an excess demand in that. The excess demand is good. The excess demand what gives parents additional flexibility. If there was no excess in demand in the total of the estate, there would be no flexibility. The Scottish Government are quite keen that flexibility is built in so that parents can get the right to choose between alternative models of provision. That is critical and it's a fundamental part of what we're trying to do. In terms of what the plans before the Education Exec today, it means that we've got 1.24 places for every eligible child. If you had 1 place for eligible child, there would be no flexibility. If you had 2 places, it could be argued there would be too much flexibility. Some place in between. Looking at our comparator authorities in terms of our regional comparators, broadly we're in alignment with what's been submitted. So 1.24 is the critical factor that we're basing our assumptions on just now. Section 4.7, as we agreed before, our provision is based on an equality of provision throughout the wards, and a summary of the ward provision in one of the appendices as well. 4.8 outlines the staffing ratios that we have. For those of you that are new to the exec, our current staffing is based on a ratio of 1 to 10. As soon as you go beyond 4 hours of provision within early years sector, that ratio reduces to 1.8. By the very nature of reduction in that ratio means that we've got to provide additional staffing to it. What we've done, I would say quite proactively, but I would also say quite cleverly, is we've also taken this chance to realign the capacity within our early years sector to be divisible by 8. So we're getting an optimum and a maximum efficiency of provision across our early years estate. So we've taken the chance to do that, and that's hardwired into the plans that we've got. 4.9 shows that we've got 48 individual infrastructure plans, a massive undertaking. It's both challenging and exciting. There's good days and there's bad days with this, but it shows you the sheer extent of the infrastructure challenge that we've got, and the investment that's going to go into the Falkirk area here. It is sizable and it's going to be very, very worthwhile. 4.10 summarises, look at the economic benefits that could be brought with the workforce expansion. 118% growth in our early years workforce. Additional contracted hours for catering and cleaning. That offers significant economic benefits to Falkirk. The figures are shown in section 4.10. 4.11 just summarises that on top of what we're doing, we've also got to provide additional meals for all the eligible children in the early years estate. We estimate 1.1 million is required for capital, and that's hardwired into the capital submission that we've made to the Scottish Government. 4.12 runs through the phased implementation plans. It looks at the plans we've got for the year 1, which is 17-18 funding, year 2, 18-19 funding. Year 1 funding, I'm very pleased to say that we had 4 projects already agreed. The part of the agreement today is that given we've revised that and we've got finalised plans in terms of costings, very pleased to say that the costing information allows us to develop 8 further projects using that year 1 money. And that is a really good thing. And that's why we need the people in place to support these projects, to get the development, to get the design right, to liaise with people and to get them hardwired so we can go out and get costings and get them in place as soon as possible. It also looks at year 2 funding 18-9, and again that's based on an estimate of our expectation is we'll get 4.1. With that, we're quite confident we can deliver 13 projects. The permission here is that you give us the director permission, once the funding is known, to go ahead and start to develop plans with these 13 projects. Again, and the third part of that is the third and fourth year funding, 1920 and 2021. We expect when the next report comes back to Executive to confirm exactly what we've got funding-wise, revenue and capital for these years. So at the moment we don't quite know what we've got. We expect to know that in May. So what we're doing here is looking at what we're knowing, the known uncertainties around funding, and to develop the estimates on what we expect to get, given we know the national amount of capital funding for 18-19. I'm quite confident with the assumptions I've made. I think it's quite prudent, and I think it's also quite proactive. We've got to make assumptions, and we've got to move this project along. Finance have been involved in that, and they're comfortable with it as well. Section 4.13 looks at the liaison and relationship we've got with the private sector, the private nursery and the childminders. At the moment, we're expecting 11% of our early years throughput to be delivered through that model of delivery. Section 4.14 looks at the proposed changes to the emissions policy. It's two minor changes, but the minor changes came about through each and every one of you reporting back some anomalies that we've currently got with the emissions. So it proves that we do listen. These have come back through members' concerns. We don't get that many issues about it, but the two proposed changes are, it's to give priority to a family residing out with a catchment area where they apply for an early years place and have already got an older sibling in situ at that early years establishment. Again, we felt it was important that we give a priority to those families in those cases. And the second one is exactly the same, that we give a priority to a family that asks for a deferred year. A deferred year means that rather than automatically going from early years nursery into P1, you ask for a deferred year and that child remains in an early year setting for an additional year. That is where they're not within the catchment area, but they would want to remain in the education establishment they're currently in. It gives a priority to it that otherwise hasn't been included in the current emissions policy. So those two major changes are detailed in the appendices that we got to the report today. Section 5 lays out the consultation. Significant consultation has been undertaken all throughout this project. Section 6 looks at the financial implications. If I could just draw members' attention to the financial implications in terms of 18-19, the revenue funding for Scotland is outlined there at £76.33 million. At the moment, Falkirk's share is £1.963 million, not insignificant, a fairly sizable chunk of money. But just to say that at this point in time, the government have withheld funding of £6 million, which they intend to give out, which is based on the graduate numbers as we go through it. So we expect to get our share of an additional £6 million. So what that figure is saying is that once we get it, the £1.963 million figure will rise. We don't know what it is at this point in time, but I expect to find out hopefully in May. So when we bring the next report, we'll firm up on these figures. In terms of the next part, it looks at the current estimated cost. Probably the critical thing that in terms of our revised financial plan, we expect that our additional plans, we require an additional £19.8 million of revenue funding and £15.3 million of capital funding. As yet, the government are looking at all 32 submissions of this, and we expect to hear from them probably in the next couple of weeks or the next month about how they look at that and how they distribute that. Obviously, there's talks in COSLA going on about that just now. The legal and the risk and equality implications are outlined in various parts of Section 3. And in conclusion, I would just again stress that it is recognised that once the government finalise the revenue and the resources implications, we can bring back more clarity to the paper in terms of year 3 and year 4 planning. But at the moment, it's looking at getting the project moving, getting infrastructure, the support people in place to enable us to develop the plans and design the infrastructure projects throughout the Falkirk area. It's a good news story. In summary, also, the appendices are the others, fairly detailed appendices. Appendix 1 looks at the proposed 5 models of delivery. The Appendix 1-2 looks at how we're structuring those models of delivery across the current school estate. What I would say is this is a plan. This is very much aligned to parental demand, and at this moment in time, we don't quite know what the parental demand would be. So what we're going to do is that there will be flexibility built in this. Once we look at the actual parental demand, these things can be changed. But it's important that we set our stall out with a proper planned way to do it. And once parental demand is known and becomes more certain, the certain flexibility, and we can realign these. So there's a lot of flexibility built into the system. But there's also a lot of unknowns built into it. But we're quite happy that based on the current projections, we've got it fairly right, and it's a good basis for us to go ahead with. Appendix 2 just looks at the various capital projects. It looks at what's been agreed just now. It looks at the 8 new projects that we've asked permission to progress just now based on the actual revised costings. And it also looks at the 13 projects that we're hoping to get permission today, again to proceed with the design stage to take it forward. I can't stress enough, it's quite critical we get this done. There's a lot of time needs to be spent in developing and designing plans to get it right. We don't want to rush it. We want to make sure that what we've got in infrastructure in Falkirk is best for Falkirk's bairns and suits the parents and families of the Falkirk area, and also suits the best needs of the staff and the children themselves. Appendix 3 looks at a summary of the ward-by-ward analysis. Very pleased to note that within the ward-by-ward analysis, at the moment, we've got enough supply to meet demand in most of the areas. Some of the deficiencies within the areas of the eligible 2-year-olds will be met by childminders. At the moment, the childminding aspect of it hasn't been factored in because we don't quite know how many childminders we're going to have here. We're looking to do that work in the next couple of weeks. So once we add the childminding demand in here, we'll have an excess of supply meets demand. So again, our aim is to get an equitable distribution across every ward. That proves that so far our plans are in place to do that. Yes, we will need to tweak it, but again, once childminders come into the equation, that will bring that demand up to meet it in every single ward. Appendix 4.1 and 4.2 looks at the current emissions policy and looks at the changes to emissions policy vis-à-vis the 2 slight changes that we propose to make. So I'm happy to take any questions. And for those of you who know in the panel, Karen Thompson is our early years project manager. She's the person that's charged with managing the project really on a day-to-day basis. So we're happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that, Gary. Councillor McHugh.
I'd like to move this report. I'd like to thank Gary for his explanation there. I think it's a very good report. I think, yet again, as we've already acknowledged, this is a huge expansion plan which will have fantastic opportunities for our children and for the families within Falkirk. I thank Karen as well for the roadshows, because we did speak at the last Education Exec about bringing staff on board and keeping staff up to date, so the anxieties are no risen beyond our control. And that was been excellent, and it's been well received, and I believe there's quite a lot of buzz about it, and staff are really looking forward and are positive about this, because it's a positive, yet again a good news story for the Scottish Government, and I welcome the continuation of the updates and the plans that are all actually going ahead.
I'm more than happy to second the report. The primary aim is to improve the outcomes for our young people, but there's a win-win in this particular report for the downstream knock-on effects of the expansion into other areas, creating jobs and enabling people to access the labour market, which can only be benefit the people of Falkirk and their families. What I would like to acknowledge is the amount of work and effort that has gone in by the service in getting to this point. I think you have the support of the whole council in taking this forward, because it's the right thing to do for our children, and I think we have to recognise the capacity within the service, and I think there is a need to support that in order to actually get things to the next stage. We've created an expectation now within our communities, and we need to be able to deliver on that and meet that parental demand. So I'm happy to second, but I would just thank the service for the work and put into this.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just before Councillor Nimmo comes in, and then it'll be Margaret, could I just say that I think we all recognise over the table that's the quality of that report and the importance of that report, and thanks to the officers involved. The strange thing is, there's the thing that Gary mentioned, was the admissions policy, which in the whole size of that report isn't it really, you wouldn't think, a critical thing, but over the years it can be a real issue for families and give families real problems, especially in this day and age when a single parent or parents are out working. So I really appreciate that as well. So I think it's an excellent report. It was Alan first and then Margaret.
Thanks, Convener. The Scottish Government have obviously confirmed in the past that this is going to be fully funded. But based on the submissions that we make, there is obviously a chance that we might have to revisit them if the government decides that they may be excessive. What plans do we have in place to cover that?
It's a very good question, and again, this is looking at the probably the known knowns and unknown unknowns. Unknowns just now are what the total funding capacity package would be. And we expect to get certainty in that by the end of May. The distribution is critical to that, and COSLA is a key player within all the local authorities in agreeing a distribution model. What we're doing today is looking at what we can do in terms of the projects that we do know what funding we've got. So we're looking at getting progressing with the money we've got for year 1 and year 2 within the package that we're quite comfortable we can do. The majority of it for year 3 and year 4 will be based on the other parts of the funding package, but we're quite confident, given that the Scottish Government have not come back to us about it, that broadly looking at our regional collaborative partners, we're all very much in the same range in terms of parameters. We're all looking at coming out the same way. So I'm quite comfortable that we shouldn't be far off the mark in terms of getting the money that we're required to do the project. But you're absolutely right that if the money doesn't meet it, we'll have to come back and slightly recalibrate it. But with every good accountant, there's recalibration and tolerance levels built into it. So we're quite confident that looking at that we can deliver. But again, you're right. But again, that's the whole point, that once we get the final funding, we'll bring a paper back to Education Exec, so everyone at the Exec is clear on the clarity of the final funding provision, so there's no uncertainty about what we're going to do eventually when the money's known. That'll be the next report.
Okay, thanks for that, Gary. Camille, just the second point is just in relation to childcare in general, and Gary's already touched on it in relation to meals for the kids that are involved. As you know, Gary, I wrote to you yesterday just asking for a report or a briefing to be brought forward regarding the possibility of a pilot programme in relation to the provision of meals for kids during the summer holidays, with the possibility of using the West Quarter Community Cafe. But there's obviously other areas that could be utilised as well, and it's not just the West Quarter area. But, Convener, I'm looking for your advice here as to whether it would be appropriate for a report to come back to this committee.
Well, I think we've just had a budget, and there's certainly been a great deal of negotiations with people in the last budget, but I don't think it would pose any problems to bring back a report, provided the report was that, what's the age group? Is it for all age groups, or what is it?
Just for primary school kids.
Primary school kids. Well, I don't see any problem in bringing back a report. You can certainly bring back a report with a view to how it would be implemented, but of course we've just had a budget, and that would make it perhaps more difficult than it might be. But a report on whether we should do it or no, I think it's quite acceptable. I don't see a problem with that. I don't think anybody will have a problem with that, but we'll find out.
Could I just say there already is a programme built in. We've just had an Easter programme of helping those families that are in greatest need, where I think there's over 200 food parcels gone out within our communities, and there may well be capacity within the funding that's already there, but I think it's a case of trying to be equitable across the council area.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think just before I said Margaret first name, Michael, but I'll let him come in. But the other thing about it is I can't imagine there'll be any objection to bringing it in, provided, as Councillor Meikle-John has said, that it's equitable. I would perhaps even look at, we keep talking about primary school children, maybe going for sublime to the reckless, but some secondary school children, they get a meal as well. So, Alan, you...
Just to add on to that, Convener, it was a pilot I was talking about, and it wasn't in relation to food parcels, it was in relation to actual meals being provided for the kids, a hot meal preferably, obviously.
It was Margaret next, then Michael, then Councillor Alexander.
Yep, 3.4, I'm absolutely delighted that quality is at the top of the list, because I think we need to ensure quality in the quantity of what we're providing, but we need quality in the staffing as well as in the buildings and the equipment that we're providing for pupils. And I'm a bit wary about the amount of staff that we're going to need and where we're going to get them from, because it takes 2 years to train an early years officer. In 5.2, Trade union representatives also attended these events. I just wondered which teacher trade unions attended these events and were they invited to them?
In relation to your first question about the recruitment and training of in-service staff, we are working with our team manager that's responsible for the curriculum support team within Falkirk, and looking at a number of ways, firstly increasing the modern apprentices, so we're growing our own, but also there's been an initiative to speak to some in-service staff, potentially support for learning assistants, classroom assistants who may potentially want to or already hold the relevant SVQ3 or HNC, and doing a refresher, sort of a refresher course for them to bring them in as well. We have also worked with our press office, and we've got a recruitment project on board in terms of posters and flyers that will go into the job centre as well, in terms of making it a more attractive career within Falkirk, and as well as working with our senior phase colleagues to give some guidance and career advice for our school leavers. And we are also working with Forth Valley College in terms of making sure that their qualification and their delivery of the HNC is then preparing these students for work, or the high quality work that we would be expecting in Falkirk. In relation to your trade union question, there wasn't any teacher trade union reps represented. It was primarily for early years practitioners, the roadshows, where we highlighted the potential changes that might be coming on board for them in terms of the model of delivery in their establishment. So if they're currently in an establishment that's term time only, and there's a plan that would move to an extended year provision, what would be offered for them. But as we move forward in the project, and it does have an impact on teachers, then they would obviously be included.
Okay, Michael.
Just a comment in relation to the provision of meals, that some of the churches are doing that at this moment in time as well. So the voluntary sector might be tapped into for that, and during the school holidays, and working in conjunction with various agencies, so that we can determine who needs what, and also the food bank, but that's in terms of parcels rather than home meals.
Just before Councillor Alexander comes in, there was a project put in last year by the last administration, but it was a year's trial to put the school meals in during the school holidays. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, Convener, a couple of things. The first of all, I'd like to ask the Director or Gary if the PEF money has been used for similar projects and priorities within the schools.
In terms of early years, PEF is not associated with that. The PEF money.
I'm talking about the initiatives during the school breaks.
School meals. No, not as far as I'm aware.
Well, Victoria Primary School, for one, is have we look at the precedents have already been set.
I know that PEF funding has been used for breakfast clubs and early start initiatives and supporting attendance and so on, but primarily that's not the intention of that funding.
There's also, I understand, discussions with the college with the view to delivering hot meals during the period. Can you?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I mean, I know that Julie McKenna, the head teacher at Victoria Primary School, has been engaged in a number of discussions to look at that, and again, we're working with them to make sure that it actually fits within the bounds of the PEF money and the spend and what would be appropriate for that. But I'm aware that she is negotiating that with the college to ensure that there's additional opportunities there, and we're happy to bring further information once we've got that confirmed.
Yeah, the head teacher at Victoria has been very proactive in this, and I think we could learn a lot from looking very closely at some of the initiatives she's instigated. In relation to the additional funding that's required for this, and I agree it's a first-class report. It's the opportunities that are there, and there will always be problems, and if these problems can be overcome because they're relatively minor, then so much the better. In relation to the formula for the the resources becoming available to local authorities. You're right, Gary, that COSLA is a very important body. Understand that the last meeting of the Children and Young People's Board that this item was on the agenda. Perhaps Councillor Nimmo could give us a brief lowdown on what actually was decided and what the outcome was as it relates to Falkirk Council. He's our representative on that particular board.
I'm quite sure Councillor Nicholl can do that and we'll get that to you. But at this Councillor Nimmo, at this stage of the game, we're trying to get people who are only going to speak once. Councillor McHugh, you had your light on. If you speak now, you would close the debate. So I'd rather, if you give me a minute, I'd rather... Sorry, you went back in.
I think it's reasonable to ask for an update from an important committee.
It's more than reasonable. I'll make sure that Councillor Nimmo provides that.
Well, to this body.
Mr. Neil will provide it.
No, it wasn't here.
Well, you know,
Mr. Nimmo wasn't here.
I understand that item is on the agenda for, I think it's this Friday, the next meeting of the Children and Young People Board, where the distribution formula will be discussed. The issue around the allocation and the distribution methodology is that some rural authorities are concerned that if we use the sort of standard percentile allocation methodology, they would be significantly challenged in terms of delivering the aspiration, whereas in authorities like ours, if we simply get our normal flat rate percentage, it's not going to be something of an issue. So I think the debate is around whether we use the standard distribution methodology or whether we don't. But just in terms of an earlier question about the overall funding package, I'm aware that the resubmission of plans have been analysed in some detail by Scottish Government and the Scottish Futures Trust in terms of what is the overall cost across the country. They're then working with COSLA, and COSLA is working with the Scottish Government to arrive at an agreed budget position, which, as Gary mentioned earlier, we expect to hear in May. And I think through the course of April, there's discussions between COSLA and Government just about what the overall level of funding that is required will be, and then we'll hear what that is.
I'm grateful to the Director for that clarification. The issue of funding is an important element of this, and I appreciate there are always alternative methodologies, particularly in relation to the relationship between COSLA and for example, rural authorities. That's why I think it's important that our representative is given the opportunity to outline what he has done within that committee, within that board, and outline the position that's been adopted within the board, and do so to this particular chamber.
Councillor McHugh, just before, sorry, Councillor McHugh, who wanted in? Right, oh, sorry. Thanks, McHugh.
I've been trying. Thank you, Convener. I welcome the report as well, and it's a very thorough report. I've got the same, similar to the question that Margaret asked, and the same concerns. I know Karen gave it an explanation, but the amount of staff we need to employ, the figures is easy to work out. It's 425 new staff in 3 years. That's a big ask and a big recruitment for this council. And I just raised my concerns. That's all. There's no question. That's a big jump for the early learning.
I think I used two words earlier on, exciting and challenging. That probably sums up how we do that. The main thing is, if we get this report agreed today, we can move on with the design. Once we get the design stuff done and bring that into place, we've got a lead-in time to bring in the staff. The key here is what we don't want to do is wait till year 4 and do every single project in year 4. We want to step it in as best we can and step in alignment with the resources we've got, which is what this report is trying to do. So I don't need anyone to underestimate the challenges ahead, but the quicker we can get the design stuff in and bring this in, the more dampened that step up on the staffing would be. And I think that's the key thing here. We get the staff drip fed in at every area along the way between now and 2020, rather than spike it in year 3 or 4. So that's the critical part. But we're up for that challenge, please be assured of that. And we're already talking to the college about how we can look at intake there. Karen mentioned on not to underestimate the Modern Apprentice programme, which is a significant, good news story for Falkirk, expanding that and trying to get more young people into it to grow our own, shall we say. So I'm hopeful in the next report we can start to talk about some of the issues in the staff in a positive way.
Yeah, keen to get there. I'm just trying to pull what's around about the table, what's being said. So my understanding of what's being said is that there should be a report brought back to the committee on the provision of school meals during school holidays for all age groups, including the widest possible consultation with churches and other groups who are in that ballpark. Is that what we're talking about? You've already spoken. What is it? You want to come in again?
It's just to confirm the COSLA position, because I've been mentioned.
If you want to go, yeah, that's 19.1.
Councillor Alexander and Councillor McHugh are obviously aware that I didn't attend the last COSLA education meeting. And again, they're obviously not aware of the reasons for that. I was actually off ill that day. And that's why there's not been any report.
Okay, thanks. That'll clarify that. Now, there isn't an amendment. Excuse me, Mr. Alexander. There isn't an amendment. So I'm going to move on to the next report. No, I'm sorry, I'm moving on to the next report, Councillor Alexander. The next report, Mr. Alexander, Scottish Qualification Authority. Gary? David?
So I didn't get a chance to sum up then.
Well, can I just clarify this? You only sum up when there's an amendment. For another.
So there's questions being raised here today, and myself as portfolio holder isn't getting a chance to comment on these questions.
You've had your chance to speak. You could have moved the motion later on. There's no amendment. There's only a motion before the floor. That's the rules. Okay.
So we're actually saying that the portfolio holder for education, the education executive, isn't getting a chance to comment on the
you could have waited until the last.
The questions and reports that have been.
Just a second, I knew this was going to happen.
Well, I just want to clarify.
Councillor McHugh, can I clarify? You'd be allowed to ask any amount of questions, but when you moved the motion, you could have waited. And my advice to you would have been, had you asked to wait to move the motion, because we're going to allow you to do that, then you would have had the chance to do that. If there was an amendment, you would have the chance to wind up. There's no chance to wind up, and we're moving on. David?
Standing orders makes a difference between...
David, standing orders tells you that the chair is in charge. Mr Mackay, you're not getting a legal ruling, you're getting it from me. Mr Mackay.
It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. You're not even allowed to scrutinise the...
Mr Mackay, once you stop being interrupted, if you could try and give Mr Mackay some respect.
Thanks, Convener. Report in the series of reports that were brought this year relating to Scottish qualifications within Falkirk Council. The initial report was brought back in September in relation to the SQA attainment, then a subsequent report in November regarding the insight data within Falkirk Council. This report looks at the insight data relating to leavers within Falkirk Council. So that's all young people who left school by Christmas this year has been captured within that particular set of data. The report is looking for recommendation to Falkirk Council Education Executive Notes, Falkirk Council School secondary leaver results, and requests the Director of Children's Services to continue to engage with our schools in tracking and monitoring pupils' progress and with our partners in planning for positive leaver destinations. Section 3 sets out the background of this particular report, and the focus is on S4, 5 and 6. In the considerations, there is an explanation regarding the virtual comparator, and that's the measure or the basket of measures that are used to judge progress within Falkirk Council, and the insight data relies heavily on this particular measure. Section 4.3 looks at Falkirk Council school leaver destinations, and we've had a particularly positive trend up until last year, and this year we've taken us a dip down to 92% leavers destination, but warranted some further exploration by my officers to understand what that actually meant for our young people. On reviewing of this particular figure, the 8% that were not deemed to be in positive destinations, 42% of those young people are now in a positive destination. And my colleagues, both in the central team, within CLD, with Liz Payton and the work that she's doing with her colleagues, and Skills Development Scotland, are actively pursuing those children and young people to ensure that they are actively engaged in securing either employment, training or further education. The one challenge that we have found is a number of children this year, for whatever reason, have chosen not to register with Skills Development Scotland or to claim benefit, which is a harder to reach population, and we're using local intelligence to identify those individual children and are actively then seeking to speak to them. Liz Payton's team is actually calling homes in the evenings, because that's the best time to actually get in contact with this particular cohort, and she's been particularly successful with this piece of work. Section 410 looks at the attainment in literacy this year. And we've continued our positive trend both at level 4 and 5 in terms of year-on-year improvement. It's a positive picture for both of those, and also in relation to numeracy in section 413, where again we've had a year-on-year improvement with our numeracy data. And this is obviously key in terms of life opportunities for our children, because the literacy and numeracy qualification opens the doors for future engagement with either college, training or work. Section 417 looks at closing the poverty-related attainment gap, and the graph in 420 looks at the bubble picture. The size of the bubble determines the size of the population at each of the particular SIMD bandings 1 to 10 and Falkirk's relative performance. You'll note that there is further work required for our SIMDs 1, 2 and 3 to close that gap further. The other populations are broadly in line with the virtual comparators and national trends, but again that remains a focus of the work within our schools to ensure that we close that gap, to increase the number of qualifications for our lower SIMD pupils, to make sure that they close the gap on their higher peers. Paragraph 4.21 takes that data into a kind of bar graph and looks at the specific numbers in relation to each. And again, it highlights the work that needs to be done in SIMDs 1 to 3, but again shows that there's some strengths in further work in SIMDs 6, 8 and 9, where we're in par with or outperforming the kind of national trends. So that's some positive aspects of the work, but there's a quite clear focus of our schools in that particular area. Section 423 looks at improvement in attainment for all. That doesn't look at the SIMD breakdown, but it looks at the relative performance and looks at the lowest performing 20%, the mid-performing 60% and the top-performing 20% of our population. In 4.24, Falkirk's performance over the last 5 years has shown a 54% improvement, and we are closing on our virtual comparator, which is currently improved over the same period by 29%, and we're ahead of the national. We're currently 10 tariff points behind the virtual comparator, which is equivalent of 1 unit at national 5. So we can quite clearly quantify that, so our schools know what the challenge is, enabled us to raise our performance to meet that particular level of performance. The mid-performance, again, we've shown year-on-year improvement. However, the virtual comparator has been increasing by more. The difference is 55 tariff points, which is equivalent to a D pass at National 5. So again, our schools know what that particular cohort are requiring to do. The central team are working with the schools in order to ensure that the curriculum offer is appropriate to meet the needs of the locality and each individual young person, and obviously to put some higher expectations on school performance. The section 2.26 looks at the upper 20% of points, and again the relative difference is 66 tariff points, which is a C pass at National 5. And again, Falkirk's performance year on year has been relatively flat, and so there's a considerable bit of work we're looking to look at in terms of the appropriateness of the curricular offer at the top end of our schools as well, to make sure that our more able students have been appropriately challenged and supported through their curricular options and choices. The next section looks at the SCQF level 6, which is the higher, and it looks at 1 hire, 3 hires and 5 hires. And over the last number of years, Falkirk's performance has remained relatively flat in terms of the performance within the higher profile. And again, the office are working very, very closely with our schools to ensure that they are suitably challenged and supported to enable our young people to, again, the maximum they possibly can do. One aspect that we have recognised this year, that last year we had a particularly strong number of children, young people staying on to 6th year. So again, we're quite keen to encourage more of our pupils to stay on to 6th year where appropriate, because that again is going to give them further opportunity to engage in more relevant qualifications at the either national or higher or advanced higher level, and will then have a knock-on benefit to Falkirk's performance data. But again, we're looking at the individual school level data as well to support that. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Fine, thanks for that, David. Councillor McHugh, it's not for me to lecture you, but could I just say to you that if you're moving the motion, when you move the motion, if you want to come back in, move it in the fashion that says you reserve the right to come back in. That resolves the problem we had a couple of minutes ago. Okay?
Move the motion with my right reserved to come back in.
Have we got a seconder?
Yes, Convener. I would like to second the motion and fully support Danny McHugh. Could I also reserve the right to come back in later on if there are any points that I feel I should make a comment on? Thank you.
I'll let you away with that one, yeah. Anybody else? Margaret?
Yeah. I welcome this report. I've just got a few comments and a question. I think the hard work of the pupils and teachers has got to be recognised in this. Teachers are giving up the break times or lunch times after schools to support pupils all through the session to ensure that they're getting their work handed in on time and they're constantly on their backs. Give me that piece of work. I need it in for Monday. This report doesn't include other qualifications, am I correct? The likes of Duke of Edinburgh's and these kind of qualifications.
The insight data does include the kind of wider basket of reports. So in terms of the data it's reported in the kind of bubble graphs, it looks at the wider cohort data, but in terms of actually that wider. However, some of those qualifications still don't necessarily get captured by insight, and there's ongoing work with Education Scotland and the Scottish Government to ensure that all qualifications or all activities that are of merit will be captured, and that the young people will be accredited with those through their certification.
Okay. Another wee question was, we've got quite a number of pupils who go on gap year straight after 5th or 6th year. Are these pupils included in the 8% of pupils who have no positive destination, or is that regarded as a positive destination?
It's regarded as a negative destination, despite the fact they're in a gap year, because they're not actually actively seeking work. And it is an anomaly. There's ongoing discussions with the bodies to see how we actually capture that appropriately, because it's not necessarily a negative destination.
Okay. Now, I know some people require data, and pupils are turning into data machines. But I think a phone call in the evening is a bit intrusive. That's just a comment.
I think it's really just in terms of actually to ensure that the actual one, that the young person's actually okay, they've actually got the relevant support, and the fact that they generally, if they're out during the day, it's usually for a valid reason, i.e. they might actually be working. So the phone call even just to confirm that, to support. And again, while we recognise that the potentially seen that way, it's not been received that way by the individuals that we're calling.
Okay.
Thank you, Convener. Just leading on for Margaret again, I'd just like to commend the teachers. There is some of the teachers going in during the Easter holidays, free charge on their own time to help the pupils, and I think that's commendable in this day and age. And there's numerous MA schools that I look after that have done that, and I'd just like it to be noted that it's very commendable for these teachers.
Quite sure I don't know, but the table under the community does value
the work of the teachers, although I don't think we know the extent of the work that the teachers get additional work. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Gary. It's just a comment in relation to the virtual comparator figures that are used in the report. Now, this is obviously not just a problem pertaining to Falkirk, it's a national problem. Having spoken to officers recently, nobody seems to know how these virtual comparator figures are actually arrived at. And I'm wondering if it would be worthwhile writing to the Minister for Education, just asking for clarification. Because we should know how these figures are, what they're based on, so that we know they're a just figure.
Thanks, Councillor. In terms of actually the basket, we know the measure that's actually used within the virtual comparator. I think the challenge is the kind of variation nationally, particularly if we look at ASN and how it's reported. We've got quite significant variation across the councils, ranging from about 16.5% prevalence of ASN within a council to 40.5%. So there's quite variation, and that then features in the virtual comparator. So we have hypothesised that potentially is impacting on the calculation. And again, I think we've had some discussions with the statisticians at Scottish Government, and they are aware of that, and they're now looking to look to see how that can be resolved and taken into account, so we've got more consistency with the VCs.
Thank you, Convener. We, of course, all want our young people to make the absolute most of the chances that they have in life. And I think it is important also that they have benchmarks and aims to go for. But I would just like to make the point that sometimes we put so much emphasis on raw figures. They are important, of course. But I just worry that people that perhaps are good in other ways, the phrase was used, the most able. Sorry, I've still got my sore throat. People can be able in many ways other than just academically. And just as university isn't for everybody, and I always worry about the figures showing how many people go to university nowadays, and quite frankly, I sometimes wonder if what they're getting out of that experience, perhaps, taking up employment would perhaps benefit their long-term career for some people. Not for everybody, obviously, but for a number of people. So I would just like to make a plea that, yes, it's important that our young people do well, but for those who are never going to get 5 hires or 3 hires, let's not forget about them. Let's encourage them. And I'm pleased in response to Margaret that other things such as Duke of Edinburgh Awards, people can shine in many different ways other than academically. And let's not forget that.
No, thank you for that. I think almost all of our schools are actively working at an individual pupil level to ensure that they've got appropriate pathways through their schooling to meet their individual needs and aspirations, and working either with individual children and young people and their families to support them with that journey. And I think that's bearing some fruit in many of our schools, and I would agree that the destination needs to be appropriate to the individual young person's aspirations and talents, and being mindful of the not putting them under unreasonable pressure. So I welcome those comments.
Okay. Councillor Hughes, if you want to come in, because when Councillor McHugh speaks, she'll close the debate.
I was actually going to come in on the virtual comparator, but that's already been explored, so I'm happy.
I think data is very important. I think it's important for us to take the pressure off children. I think we acknowledging the ability of children, but data itself is important for us to analyse, so as we know where we're going as an education establishment, so we can reflect on where our pitfalls are, where we're doing well, and where when we need to pull our socks up a bit. And I think taking any pressure or view off our children, because they are working the best of their ability, but we need to analyse, acknowledge and move forward with any data that is collated.
Move on to Fort Valley and Westland Progress Report. Mr. Robert.
Thank you. This is just an update report following on from the report that came to the last Education Executive. At that point, we were on the cusp of submitting an initial regional improvement plan to the Scottish Government and Education Scotland. That was submitted at the end of January, and we got some feedback on it in the middle of February. Broadly speaking, what Education Scotland told us was that the planning that we'd done and the progress that we'd made in terms of establishing the collaborative pretty much from a standing start in November, that we were on track. The next iteration is that we will submit a more detailed and fulsome plan again to Scottish Government Education Scotland in September, and that will cover a 12 to 18 month period about the intended actions of the collaborative. During the course of January and February, we had a number of different events where we involved significant numbers of head teachers from across all 4 authorities. The most significant of these was an event held at the Inshira Grange Hotel, where we had 240 head teachers from West Lothian, Clackmannanshire, Stirling and Falkirk. That was under the auspices of the Scottish Attainment Challenge and the Pupil Equity Funding provided by the Scottish Government. And what happened on those days was that there was input from Education Scotland and from Scottish Government, but the core activity of the day was collaborative work and discussion among head teachers mixed from across the 4 authorities to share practice and discuss ideas and explore ways in which that they could be, in particular, developing strategies and approaches to close the poverty-related attainment gap. So within the report you will see on page 47, paragraph 4.7, a variety of different workshops that were delivered by school staff for other head teachers. So you can see that each authority contributed to that. Our input came from Falkirk and Larbert High, and also from Bankier Primary School. Education Scotland carried out an evaluation of the event based on the feedback of those that were attending. And I think, in my experience, to get a feedback from head teachers that 75% of them are saying that it was a very successful day and very informative is quite a high figure. So the next steps are for us to continue with the 5 themed areas that are set out in paragraph 3.2. We have officers and indeed head teachers from across the 4 authorities working in these areas. They are continuing to develop detailed plans. In particular, they are developing cross-region CPD opportunities for our teachers, our frontline teachers and our staff. We're also working collaboratively. Gary alluded to this earlier. We're working collaboratively in terms of the early years planning and modelling, so that we've got consistency across the 4 councils. There will be, as I mentioned earlier, there will be a further plan developed, and that will be submitted in September, and I'll bring a further update in terms of where the collaborative is going and the progress that's been made to the meeting at the end of May.
Okay, thanks for that. Commissioner McHugh.
I'd like to move this report and reserve my right to come back in.
I would like to second the report and reserve my right to come back in. Thank you, Convener.
Yeah, thanks for the report. And I just really, it's on 5.3. There's a wee list of people who will be involved in the consultation, further consultation. There's practitioners. How will they be chosen? And I don't see any reps from LMCTs on this list, and my fear is if they're not on the list, they may well be left out when it comes time for the invitations to go out. The other question I have is, what impact has the collaborative had on teaching staff so far? Has there been any? And will the collaborative working that's going on just now, will that impact on the upcoming in-service day in May?
First of all, 5.3 probably ought to have listed LNCT members. There's reference within the report to an event that was held in Alva Academy where the trade union reps were invited and indeed attended, so apologies for that. In terms of impact at classroom level thus far, I would say that will flow through following on from the development of specific CPL activity. The other thing, however, that we are keen to do is to develop a collaborative style and approach where actually it's a bottom-up activity. So in terms of selecting teachers, we're hoping that we get to a point where teachers are volunteering to collaborate, firstly, across and within their own clusters. But you'll be aware that the Scottish Government have developed something called a Broad General Education Improvement Tool. Schools are starting to use that, and what that's enabling them to do is look at schools with a very similar profile that may be in a neighbouring authority, and what we'll be encouraging them to do is to work together across different authorities in terms of if one school is doing well, let's say in West Lothian, and it's got a very similar profile to a school in Falkirk, then they could be sharing practice and working across individual stages. So this process of developing collaborative approaches and collaborative working isn't something you do in 6 months. It's something that will probably take 5 to 10 years to develop fully. But we do intend, and I intend, to make sure that all the key stakeholders are involved at every stage.
Okay. Anyone else?
Thank you, Convener. I always like to end a meeting wiser than when the meeting started. So to that end, Lab at High School PEF strategy. What's PEF?
Pupil Equity Fund.
Okay. And number 2 would be, I thought that Stirling and Clackmannanshire had a joint education service. Is that incorrect?
Correct. That was disbanded about 2 years ago.
Right.
And in the intervening period, what happened, as I understand, was that the education service was run and managed from Stirling, and the Children and Family Social Work Service was run and managed by Clackmannan. And when that partnership broke up, what happened was Clackmannan very quickly moved to recruit their own education team, and Stirling moved quickly to recruit their own Children and Family Social Work team. So they are now constituted just the same as we are.
Anyone else?
Convener.
Sorry. Councillor Hughes.
Okay.
No, Councillor Alexander.
The issue of collaboration is obviously at the centre of this particular report and at the centre of the improvement programme that's been brought forward by the Government. Collaboration can take place at various places and in various forums. And I'm sorry to hear that Councillor Nimmo was missed the last meeting of the Children and Young People's Forum or Board, because that itself is an important area for the gaining of information, for the sharing of experiences and for gathering the knowledge. And as I say, I'm sorry he missed the last meeting through illness. Can you tell me what the reason for missing the rest of the meetings were, the other 3 that have occurred since he was appointed to the position? Because it's important that we be able to scrutinise the actions of not only our officers, but also our members. And this is too important an issue, too important a forum, a board, to allow the situation to develop where a member does not attend over an extended period. So I'd like an explanation as to why Mr Nimmo has missed all of the meetings of this board since he was elected to that position, and if he's considering giving up that position to allow someone who can attend to attend.
Just stop a second, Mr Alexander. You've raised a valid point. Councillor Nicholl will be entitled. I did it again. Councillor Nimmo. It's just, I mind you've got more hair than her. But what I was going to say was, it's a fair question to ask. The Argona's, whether he's going to give up, etc., as a matter for himself, to consider and for the group. We didn't ask about any of your members that didn't attend meetings. However, we would if that was a similar case. So it's a fair point. Councillor Nimmo will answer the point.
That's not strictly true. I haven't missed them all since I was appointed at all, but the ones I have missed have clashed with other important council business, and I've been given priority to that. That is the reason why I've not been in attendance. The next meeting is next week, so I'll be in attendance.
Right, but can I just say, thanks for that. That's that clarified. That issue's clarified. We're not going down the road today doing that. Right, Mr. Alexander, have you any other relevant points to raise?
Yes, I'd like to know which meetings that...
No, Mr. Alexander, let me just say to you, Mr. Alexander, let me just say to you here and now, we're not going to do the debate on that. This committee is dealing with really important business. You have had your point answered, Mr. Alexander. You have had your point answered. You can do that in another area. Have you anything relevant? Pardon, Mr. Alexander. You're not going to win, so what's the point? Let me say this to you again. You have heard the answer that's been given. If you think that answer isn't correct or it lacked any further information, you can get that at a later date. Let us move on to the business of the committee. That's fine, that's all we want to do.
You're saying that we cannot question a representative?
No, Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander, I didn't care how many times I have to repeat myself. You've had an answer for Councillor. You've had an answer from Councillor Nimmo. Mr. Alexander, no more on that subject. That's it, finished. Is there anybody else who want to speak?
I think what we have to do is recognise the work of the collaborative and the potential opportunities that can bring to actually improving the attainment of our children. I think that the ability to share good practice out with our own authority is a tremendous opportunity, and I think we should be commended in taking this forward. But I do agree that we need to have proper representation within the bodies at COSLA where there are negotiations being taken place, and indeed we do have to ask questions if that is not happening. As these boards within COSLA are making decisions, the decisions are only ratified at leaders, but those boards are taking decisions, and I'm very concerned at the information that has come from COSLA in relation to that, and I really do hope that Mr Nimmo takes that matter up and will certainly be in attendance next week.
Okay, anyone else? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Convener. I just really wanted to make an observation. To say that I am very impressed with the report and also Mr Naylor's clarity of approach in terms of giving us the information in terms of the process of the collaborative working approaches, but also the bigger picture in relation to, or the strategic importance of the collaborative working approaches. Very interested in the themes, the workshops, also the fact that there is participation from different stakeholders in the collaborative approach. And I welcome this report, and I look forward to listening to more of Mr Naylor's reports in the future, because I find them fascinating. Thank you.
As we do yours usually. But thanks for that. Councillor McHugh.
I too welcome the collaborative. I think for so long we've spoke about sharing good practice, and this is finally, going forward with that. I think it will be very encouraging, empowering. It'll help the leadership of our own high schools as well as every level of our education, and I welcome further development in it.
Right, okay, thanks for that. I think then that is the end of the business. Thanks to those that attended. Thanks for coming along. Safe journey home.